Let's talk about the Denver Nuggets, fantasy sleepers and busts, and guys to keep an eye out for, breakout players. It's time for a season preview. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Sloyd, and in this house, we support Nintendo Nate. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, and through until September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms, so give it a double bang and a thumb and a comment. First of 30, fantasy previews. They're going to be mock drafts and other shows all mixed in over the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks? 3 weeks? 2.5 weeks? Whatever it is. But this is where we get down to business. We look at where ADPs and ranks and all that sort of stuff sits. Of course, ESPN, as I look at my watch it's not on my hand, I'm here to tell you that it's under 40 days before the season starts, and ESPN has rankings up from April the 22nd, which of course don't reflect reality at all, because why would you bother playing there? They don't care about this game, and that is okay. They can decide not to care about it, but then you should care not to play there. Easy done. They're not adjusted anything. They will, I'm guessing, at some point, make that adjustment, and we'll see what happens from there. But we're talking Denver Nuggets. But before we do that, it is that time when we do these shows that it is time for us to talk Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. If you're unaware of what this is, let me tell you what it is. It is a large fantasy basketball competition. Last season, we ran points division and head-to-head category division. We ran 720 teams in the category division. We ran 360 in points. I'm aiming to get those numbers again, and if we go over, great. I hope we get more. We're also introducing at least 120 teams for a rotisserie division. That has already got 75 people filled into that just through being a member of Basketball Monster. So if you want a part of that, you got to get into that one quickly. So what is it? What is Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl? Like, I'm going to attach the rules down below. We're playing standard nightcap. The points leagues are ESPN scoring. We had the points, we have head-to-head categories, we have roto. There are 12 teams in the division. It's $50 entry. The prize money is not determined until I know how many teams are in it. But you get if you make the playoffs in your 12-team division, you get a payout. And then if you finish in the top 3 of the final Battle Royale round at the end, which is a harder concept to explain if I don't want to go too deep into it. But basically, the top 2 teams out of every division end up in a big 1-week matchup to determine the overall winner. We have a 40-game hard cap per week, and in Roto, it's 84 games for the season per position. In head-to-head, it's 4 games per position per week. These are slow drafts. We have twice daily fab bidding in order to get our players. It's basically the same rules as last year. The major difference this year versus last year is we have a Roto division, and instead of 18-man rosters, we've dropped it down to 16-man rosters. Now, once I get these drafts starting to start, I'm going to do a video at some point on showing you how to actually use, because people complain about not being able to understand Fantrax or use the games cap. I'll show you how I do it. Never had a single problem with figuring out games last season. Not to say that other people won't, because they will, but I'm going to show you the way that I do it, and literally ran into 0 problems with it last season. And I did make the Battle Royale of one of them. I think it was categories. I don't know. I made one of the Battle Royale finals, but not the other one. Later in the show, I will give you... Actually, you know what? I'll just do it now. If you want to join the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl for this season, there is a Google form linked in the show notes on audio and in the YouTube description. There's a couple of basic questions. It's like, what email do you use for Fantrax? All right. The next question is, what leagues do you want to be in? Now, you've got a choice. You can be in... And I'll put those... I'll put those rules back up for Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, just so we got them on the screen while we're talking. What league do you want to be in? You can be in all 3. head-to-head points in Roto, and there's a preference list on there. So if your first preference is I want to be in all three, you put that there. If your first preference is category, but if that all fills up and you don't get that, then you want Roto next, you put that in your second preference. Or if you want two, I want to be in Roto and head-to-head. If I can't get those, I'll be in points in Roto or whatever. There's a preference list on that form, and then there's one really basic question that you answer just so I know that it's not getting you filled up with random people who you don't pay attention to anything. Really, really easy stuff. Unlike previous seasons with the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl entries, there won't be a separate entry per show. So once you enter, you only need to enter once. That you don't need to enter multiple times. You don't need to go, I tried 5 times already. You only have to enter once. Invites will not go out within 24 hours of me putting this show out, but you should start to see invites towards the end of this week going through. Hope that all makes sense. We good with that? I think we should be. Now, after that extended intro on Locked On Fantasy Basketball, which we won't do every show, we are here to talk about the Denver Nuggets, which is a team, obviously, that has immense fantasy intrigue for us because Nikola Jokic plays there, but a team with also some changes over the offseason. Let's just start with what I project to be their starting 5. Jamal Murray, Christian Braun, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and Big Chungus, Nikola Jokic. I think it's impossible to debate most of that. The question is going to be Christian Braun at shooting guard. He replaces Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. There are other options there, but I'm certain that Braun is going to get first crack at replacing him there. So these are my projected starting 5. The other options there could be Russell Westbrook. It could be Julian Strawther. They're the two that I think are probably most realistic, and Westbrook more so realistic than Strawther of getting into that position. But that's how we see it at this point. That's our projected starting 5. Let's take a look at guys, and again, don't want to use the sleeper term. What I do want to use is the term undervalued players. And we'll start with the undervalued players by talking about someone, of course, that I think is somewhat underrated. And I think Russell Westbrook is sliding under the radar somewhat, which is weird because it's Russell Westbrook. Westbrook is ranked 217th in ESPN category leagues. On point for Yahoo, his ADP is 143 and his rank is 148. Now, what I'm highlighting on these undervalued player lists is that I think that where Westbrook is ranked for category leagues on ESPN is too low. He's got to be in the mix as a later round pick. And Yahoo doesn't split ADPs or ranks based on league type. So if you're in a points league, an ADP of 143 and a rank of 148 for Westbrook is actually really good. That is a tremendous value proposition to get Westbrook in that area. So, yeah, depending on where your league sits, yes, Westbrook is one of the more frustrating players to watch. He's one of the worst three-point shooters in league history in terms of volume. His defensive inabilities come to the fore often. But if he ends up playing 25 or 26 minutes a night, easy points league value, possibly category league value with the caveats of what is going on with his percentages. So he's just someone that I think at the moment is maybe just being overlooked somewhat, and I think that should change. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You've heard me speak about FanDuel for a long time, right? It's America's number one sportsbook. Of course, I'm going to talk about it. They've been here with us and supporting us for a long time, and now they've got something else to give back to you guys because from now through until September the 22nd, so you've got about a week to go on this offer, FanDuel is offering all of their customers who place a $5 bet a 3-week free trial for NFL Sunday Ticket thanks to YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. Don't suggest watching the Dolphins at the moment. I reckon we may be cooked. Hopefully Tua is okay. Didn't look so, but we hope he's all right. But maybe you don't want to watch the Dolphins anymore. Maybe you do want to watch something else. All you need is that Google account and a current form of payment. Of course, you can cancel that at any point. So go to FanDuel.com right now and download America's number one sportsbook. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. So yeah, I think Russ is sitting a little bit as an undervalued player at the moment. Again, this is me talking about Russell Westbrook, who you have heard talk about Russell Westbrook and be very critical of Russell Westbrook and the way that people also value him in fantasy. But I think that there is a chance that he actually does more this season than he did last season for the Clippers. Now, on the flip side of that, who are the guys at the moment that I think are probably being overvalued? Well, there's two players, and they're both starters. We're not talking about, this guy's ranked 300th, and I think he should be 350th. That doesn't matter for most of us. But the poo cookie Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon, I think, are a little bit overvalued. Porter has a Yahoo ADP of 68 with a Yahoo rank of 70. And for category leagues, that's garbage. We're not drafting him there. That's insane. And what I think is really, really interesting. Now, I often will talk about sort of individual comments that I get, which aren't always reflective of society. They aren't always reflective of everything that's going on. But if one person thinks it, usually multiple people do. And I talked yesterday on one of my socials, I think Instagram, I posted about, I think Porter is a bust this season. And someone said, how could that possibly be the case, Josh? Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has left. So Porter is going to have to do more. And that's fine to think that, but you have to understand how all that stuff works. Because KCP had a usage of 13%. KCP leaving doesn't mean that they play with 4 players. It doesn't mean that no one fills that slot. And the odds are that the person coming in, whether that's Christian Braun, or, oh my God, if it's Russell Westbrook, that they are going to have a usage higher than 13%. Brown might have 13. He might have 14. He might have 15. I tell you what, Westbrook's not having 13%. So this idea that because a better player left, and I think it's inarguable that KCP is better than Brown and better than Westbrook, that doesn't mean that more shots go to these other guys because KCP was taking no shots anyway. So this idea that they lose a better player, therefore the other guys must take more shots, not realistic in this scenario. And there's a couple of other those scenarios spread throughout different teams. Porter, average, you can see 17 points. That's really good. 7 rebounds is pretty good. Bad assists, bad steals, bad blocks, average field goals, solid free throws with no volume. Good threes. Like, they're fine numbers. But taking them at 60, 70, I think makes no sense whatsoever. I also think his forward counterpart, Aaron Gordon, is a little bit overrated in certain spots. I think it's for category leagues mainly for him. His ADP is 117. His Yahoo rank is 132. On ESPN, he's got an ADP of 109 with a rank of 93. And on Fantrax, his ADP is 129. Now, the Fantrax one I could sort of let slide. But an ESPN category rank of 93 is ridiculous for Gordon for category leagues. His ESPN ADP of 109 is too high as well. I don't have a real problem. You've got to be really specifically looking and focusing in on punting a free throw percentage likely with Gordon. He's also not a high usage player. He also doesn't play big minutes. Maybe he does this season. He's 29 now as well. He averaged 14 and 6.5 with 0.8 steals and 0.6 blocks. He shot 56 from the field, but 66 from the line. That ESPN one's probably the most egregious, and you're going to hear me say that sentence quite a lot. But I just don't see that Gordon is valued correctly at the moment. For points leagues, I think he's probably bang on. But we've got to determine, and we have to look at all these different things in different ways, that there are different formats to pay attention to that do sometimes get lost in the shuffle somewhat. Let's talk about breakout candidates. Now, as with so many of these things, like trying to 100% always determine what the terms mean is not easy. What I'm looking at with a breakout candidate is just someone that has a chance to really step up their production from things that they have done in the past. Maybe that's to a career high level or something they haven't really hit at any other point. So I've got 2 names sitting here for the for this squad, and one of those is Christian Braun, who I think that's relatively obvious. And the other one is the aforementioned Julian Strawther on this list. Braun, someone who got, I think, a little bit overrated. People thought that he'd step into a large role with no Bruce Brown last season. That obviously didn't happen. He averaged 7 points with under 4 rebounds, steals and blocks, and really non-existent. He's 23. He played 20 minutes a night with 16 usage. Those minutes could jump 10 per game. The usage might fall 2 percentage points. But there is also the chance that in year 3 for Braun, which is where we're at, that if things start to come together a little bit more, maybe that becomes 1.2 steals a game. It's possible. Maybe he gets 3 assists and 5 rebounds. And he averages 12 points. Maybe he just does what KCP does. I don't fully trust him to do it. And he's a bad free throw shooter, which isn't a great sign. But there is a chance for him. He's not someone that I'm looking to target necessarily in terms of drafting. But I do think there is a chance that he beats my expectations and actually does have a true breakout for this upcoming season. The other one that I've got on this list is a second-year player who we saw some flashes of Julian Strawther last season. He stepped up and had a big game in preseason, I think it was, and then people overreacted to that as they always do. It always happens. You always got to look at the path. I think Strawther had this huge game and people were talking, man, he's going to have huge, I'm going to draft him. Like, okay, where on earth is there 30 minutes a night? Well, this year, there is a chance for that because there is that gap. And yeah, Brown will get first crack, but what if he just goes back and plays 20 minutes and then all of KCP's 29 minutes remain available? And yes, Westbrook's going to take some. Strawther was a hot and cold player last season. He suffered multiple injuries, but what he is, he's a slightly bigger player than Brown. He's a guy that should be able to shoot 37% from the field. Doesn't indicate how good of a shooter he is. He's better than that. He had 21 usage with 11 minutes. He should be a relatively strong rebounder as a shooting guard type player as well. And if there's someone who's got a better fantasy game out of Brown and Strawther, I think it's Strawther. Now, we're talking a 2% chance versus a 95% chance that he gets starters minutes versus Brown. Not that Brown necessarily even gets 30, but the likelihood of Brown doing it is way higher than what Strawther is. But Strawther, to me, is the one that I keep a closer eye on because even if Brown starts and we see him with 29 minutes a night, he's going to turn into short Harrison Barnes. He's going to turn into new age KCP, the guy that we look at and go, he's a 140th ranked player, but like that's great. He should be on rosters, but he shouldn't because he doesn't do anything. And it's boring and there's no upside and there's just no value in that unless you're playing a season-long roto-type format where stats accumulate. Because on a head-to-head daily changes basis, that is not sort of particularly appealing sort of type of player, I don't think. Well, that's how I generally view that sort of stuff. Let's take a look at some things that I think are risks across the rotations. Because at the moment, like you saw my projected starting five, but that doesn't mean it's always going to go that way. Maybe Westbrook does start. If Westbrook does start, then that talk of me having him undervalued at the start is going to hit doubly, but then it also could go away as people start to draft him higher. There's a chance that Peyton Watson could play smaller, and we're going to talk about Watson a little bit more. I don't think that'll happen, but there's a chance they push him down and he plays the 2, which he is not a 2. I don't care where he's listed on sites, he is not a 2. All right, he is a 4, but he is listed on sites as a shooting guard. He is not. The other rotation risk in terms of how I'm trying to project it, at the moment, I think Dario Saric is their backup center. But what if they go with Vlatko Cancar, who missed all of last season with a torn ACL? And this is only applicable for deeper leagues, yes. But I've got to try and cater for most people here. So watch that one, because Saric was in the rotation for the Warriors last season, and then he sucked and they removed him. So maybe Cancar plays over there ahead of Dario Saric in that position. I wouldn't say that that's, 100% outrageous. Maybe it's a little bit outrageous for you, but it's it's not a crazy statement. I don't think. We'll just have a quick look at Saric for those of you who do need to pay attention to what Saric does, because in deeper leagues there might be something here. He is 30 now. He's 6'10". He averaged 2.3 assists in his 17 minutes, 8 points and 4 rebounds. Now he doesn't do anything defensive stat wise, but if anything was to happen to Nikola Jokic, I would immediately, depending on how things go during the season, but I would immediately look at Dario Saric as an ad. Because they've gone with guys that are opposites of play style to what Jokic is in the past, and it hasn't worked. So now they're going, let's get a guy who's sort of similar to Jokic, who we can run as a passer, who's not a great defender, but still is a solid enough rebounder that impacts defenses. Because Saric had a run as a backup center in Phoenix 2 years ago, where the defense was awesome with him out there, even though he's not considered a good defender. But he's like a similar-ish archetype to what Jokic is as a player, and that is just not the way that they have usually run things, the old mates, the Denver Nuggets. We're going to come back in a sec. Yeah, we'll come back in a sec. Because this last year when we did the team previews, I introduced this segment. We did a little bit of it during the regular season, but something that just, I like doing. That's under the lens. We take one player and we try and dig into some of the numbers a little bit deeper to figure out what we can about them. And the player that we're digging into today is the man that I talked about before. It's Peyton Watson. So let's talk about Peyton Watson. A guy who had horrendous college numbers, obviously. A guy that, again, he's listed as shooting guard, but he plays exclusively as a power forward. And he's like a reserve center at times, but maybe he's going to need to play down onto the wing just a little bit more. That is possible. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that graph, the radar chart on the right-hand side, showing you the percentage of the positions that were played. And as you can see, basically he's playing all of his time as a power forward. He didn't play much at center. He had a couple of minutes at point guard, a couple of shooting guard, and a little bit of time at small forward. So that's not a clean replacement for KCP. You could argue that, he'll just play the 3, but that would mean Michael Porter is the 2, and I don't think that really works either. So that's why I'm not as certain that there are big minutes for him. Watson's a guy that I think long-term, if they can't figure out a situation with Aaron Gordon and a contract extension, that Watson is the Aaron Gordon replacement. A perimeter defender who can play as a small ball center because he's a good rim protector, who doesn't have to do much offensively. Because that's basically what Gordon's role is at the moment. If you can see this chart, which is here from Crafted NBA, and you can see all the greens in that bottom section, that's all his defensive metrics. His versatility, his rim protection frequency, his rim defense, his deflection numbers, all that stuff is there. The top is the offense, and it's all bad. His versatility his portability is low, his offensive load is low, his shooting numbers are really bad, his shooting quality, his true shooting, all that stuff is really quite bad. And there's got to be improvements in that to find that larger role for Peyton Watson. If we look at his Darko career progression, Darko, another all-in-one metric, which has forward predicting ability, you will see that last season, I was very high on Peyton heading into last season. It was not the best go of things for him. He's always been under a 0, so a negative number in Darko, which is not where you want to be. And it got worse last season. Not the be-all and end-all, but you want that graph to be pointing up. The graph here on the left-hand side is from Basketball Index, and I wanted to just highlight a couple of things here. The way that the players play, on the x-axis, it's the time on defense that they guard shooting guards, and the y-axis is their catch-and-shoot 3-point attempts per 75. Because we think the guy that's going to replace Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is going to be a catch-and-shoot 3-pointer guy, ideally, and he's going to be guarding opposing 2s. That's what KCP did. So that's what's on this graph. The name very much in the top right corner means that they take the most catch-and-shoot 3s per 75, and guarding opposing shooting guards is Julian Strawther. And then down the bottom, you will see 3 names. The guy defending shooting guards the most there is Christian Braun. The next one is Russell Westbrook, who doesn't take many catch-and-shoot 3s at all. And then the guy that never guards shooting guards is Peyton Watson, but he took more catch-and-shoot 3s last season than both Westbrook and Braun. So again, the value in him as that defensive guy, the value in him as a catch-and-shoot spot-up guy, not that he's a good shooter, but he does take them, is probably better than what Westbrook and Braun bring. The problem is he doesn't spend any time guarding out in the perimeter because they like to use him as more of a big, more of a forward defender, more of a rim protector, which sort of goes against that positional ideal that we need. The other thing that I started to do, and this hasn't been published anywhere, and I'm not sure that it will, is that I created a fantasy basketball similarity tool. It's not based necessarily on the volume of stats that people bring up, but it's this idea that I talked about a lot in the offseason about shape. What is the shape of a player's stats? Yeah, what do they do that's similar to others? Not in the same volume necessarily. There's always going to be little outliers, but like the idea of a player, and that's what I've got here. So I'm going to throw that up on the screen for you now to take a look. And the bolded line is Peyton Watson with his shape of what he is as a player, using values in terms of the Z-score impact in fantasy. What I find really interesting is that the 3 most similar players to Watson's statistical profile are players that we're all looking at as sort of later round fantasy flyers. Rookie Matas Buzelis, Noah Clowney in Brooklyn, and Carlo Makovic for the Pelicans. And 2 of those guys, Buzelis and Makovic, haven't played yet, so maybe their projections are way off. But you'll notice that Buzelis, shot blocking power forward. Clowney, power forward center that block shots. Makovic, starting center with some shooting but block shots. And the last name there is Goga Badadze. Really, really good defensive center who blocks shots and can shoot a little bit with 3. And that is the comparison to Peyton Watson. That is why, while I probably like him the most out of Strawther and Braun, and even Westbrook as players to get more minutes on Denver, all of those things I think that I've gone through there show that it's the way that he has been used in the past and the way that his skill set is aligned suggests that role really doesn't exist. It might. Maybe they have a complete about face. and they decide that he is a different player now than what he has been in the past. I suppose that is possible. But with the way that things currently sit, with the way that they've been using Peyton Watson, I'd be a little bit skeptical about him stepping into that larger role. Just for his base numbers, 7 points, 3 rebounds last season in 19 minutes, over a block, subpar percentages, doesn't get many assists, hits half a three. He's only 22. He's only 6'7", so the size means that theoretically he should play lower. But I've never seen him deployed in that manner. So take all of those numbers for whatever grain of salt you want. Understand that a lot of that is what has happened last season. My similarity score is for projections for this season, but that's the sort of player that I think we're looking at here in this situation with Peyton. All right, let's take a look at whatever injury concerns we have around this team, which guys that we need to be paying some attention to regarding where they sit. Health-wise, there are 4 guys that I want to touch on here. One of them is Jamal Murray, because we saw him banged up with multiple shin splint issues last season, looked a shell of himself in the Olympics. He didn't actually look right in the playoffs either. I've got Vlatko Čančar, who returns from a torn ACL. There's Poop Cookie Michael Porter Jr. with his back. And then, of course, this is the last one I'm going to mention on this show, is Daron Holmes II, who's out all season with a torn Achilles. If you're in a dynasty league, Holmes is a guy that, if you're not good, he's obviously impacting nothing this season. I think he's going to be a very good player long-term with an immense fantasy skill set, and you can probably get him in rookie drafts at a bit of a discount because he's missing this season. So that would be someone that I'm looking at in that sort of a scenario. But let's get back to Jamal Murray. This is a good time, I think, for us to talk about what Murray could bring, may bring, should bring. He had the best season of his regular season of his career last season. Murray, 28 years of age now, just signed the extension, 28 usage, 21 points, 4 rebounds, 6.5 assists, shot 48 and 85, 2.5 threes. That's all really, really good. Those numbers are fantastic. But he just looked bad at the end of the season. He looked bad in the Olympics. He missed a bunch of time with that leg injury. And I am really concerned. I'm concerned because he had the torn ACL. And then we've got just a cascading impact of that, which leads to compensation-type injuries. Often, we are two years removed. I think it's 2 years removed from the torn ACL. And things just don't seem right. So I'm a little concerned. Now, I'm not looking at his horrid form in the Olympics or his subpar form in the playoffs and going, well, this is him now, I'm avoiding him at all costs. But I'm also not looking at Jamal, the headmaster here, and thinking that he is this great option for us, at the top 30 type of range, which is around where he hovered last season. If I can get him at 50s, sure. Absolutely no problem with that. I think that's actually really strong to be able to get him in that area. But I don't know where that's going to be. So we have to have, I think, some level of worry about where he sits, about where he goes with his health from here on out, because it wasn't encouraging last season. Now let's talk Vlatko Čančar, who was really starting to develop into a solid enough backup big man. He missed all of last season with the torn ACL. He's 27 now. He's one of Jokic's best mates. He's got some shot blocking upside. DeAndre Jordan is the backup center. One of the backup centers. Dario Saric is there as well. But I could see Čančar and Saric actually being able to play together, and I can see Čančar outplaying Dario. So when you're in a deep league, guy that's completely off the radar here, Čančar, this is going to be his opportunity, I think, to not necessarily 100% establish himself, but just start to do a little bit more. So just someone that I'm watching. I'm watching where it goes. I'm watching how they deploy him. But because what happens when you don't play all season, we tend to forget a little bit about who you are as a player. So Čančar moves into that. Let's take a look at what their schedule is. They've got 48 quality games this season. That's middle of the pack. What is a quality game? A quality game is a game that is played in the NBA on a day where there are not bulk games on. So if you play a game when there are 11 games on an NBA slate, that means that your fantasy roster is likely going to have some sort of squishy sit-start decision, and you lose a game played with a guy on your bench. If you play on a game that is a day that it's got 3 games, 4 games, 7 games, 9 games, you likely don't have to make that decision. That's a quality game. The Nuggets sit in the middle of the pack. They've got 48. The most is 59. They're in the middle of the pack. They've got the most back-to-backs in the NBA at 16. The worry there is that probably impact on that is Jamal Murray a little bit if he suffers more injuries to his lower body, but otherwise 16 back-to-backs. The other thing I'd watch with the Nuggets is that last season they were fatigued. They ran out of gas, and I wouldn't be shocked if we just see, now this is not really the doctor's forte, Dr. Michael Malone, but maybe they just go a little easier on some of their players with that high back-to-back count. They have 14 weeks this season where they play the maximum amount of games. So I think that's a relatively good thing to know for fantasy, is talking about how many times you play the most games for the week. They're at 14. Their playoff schedule, again, this is depending on where you start your playoffs. That first number there is finishing on March 23rd, then March 30, then Yahoo default, then ESPN default. So they go 3-3-4, they go 4-4-3, they go 4-3-4, or they go 4-3-4-3. That is the way those schedules are going to play out. So, yeah. That is Denver's schedule, which is just pretty normal. Relatively normal. The first one, 3-3-4, is not ideal, but it's actually totally okay. Totally okay to do that as a schedule. Now, what are we going to move on to now? Let's talk about young players. The youth invasion. If you know that joke, good for you. We're talking about guys who are aged under 23. There are 4 guys that I want to talk about here. Trey Alexander, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther, and PJ Hall. This leans a little bit more into dynasty stuff, and my dynasty formula, Bazemore, is available on Basketball Monster. There is a sliding scale ability to turn from a contender into a mid-pack, into a rebuilding team, to change the values of guys. This is still something that we are testing. I rolled it out last season. It had pretty good results. We've changed a little thing with it this season just to help with some injured players. But basically the same sort of stuff that involves a bunch of fantasy value, historical games played. It involves current season production. It involves age and experience and a whole bunch of other things. Trey Alexander in the Bazemore stat, even though he's a two-way player, actually comes out as a top 200 type of player in a dynasty format. I really like Trey Alexander. And this is the longest of long shots, but the opening in the Nuggets starting lineup is for a shooting guard. Trey Alexander plays shooting guard. I think he's already better than Jalen Pickett, who's just not going to play, and he's not even under 23 in year 2. There's Braun and there's Strawther. We talked about these guys. Alexander, we're not drafting him really anywhere, but I really, as an undrafted player, he would go in my dynasty leagues close to the top 30 of rookies. I really like him. Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther, both of those guys project as top 140 dynasty assets for me. They're both still really young, and they both, look, I think Watson's year possibly comes next year. Strawther's could come this year. They're just names to watch. Now, I don't have Dayron Holmes on this list. He's not going to play this season, but he's a top 100-ish dynasty guy, I think. Maybe top 120. The other one is PJ Hall, who's on a two-way as well. Another guy that probably shouldn't have lasted that long. He's just under 23. He's a tall shooting player, tall power forward center who can shoot a little bit, which, again, like if something does happen at all to Michael Porter Jr., although Porter plays more up the 3, Gordon can slide down, but a Hall, Watson, 3-4 reserve group or 4-5 is just something a little bit interesting to watch. So that's their young players. They're not blessed with an abundance of young guys necessarily in Denver, but they have some. They have some. We've talked a little bit about this man already, but we're going to do it again because in this segment here we're talking risk versus reward. You would have noticed, or maybe you haven't, that I did a show the other day where I was talking about the best case, worst case outcomes, looking at statistical variance year on year and trying to figure out what would happen if a player hit all of those statistical upside variances in one go versus all those statistical downside variances and where that would place them. And to me, the player with some of the largest variance out of the important ones is Jamal Murray. His fantasy points variance, that best case, worst case, and I have converted that to points now. So if there's someone that you want to know about for fantasy points variance, I've got that list. 6.2 fantasy points variance, best case, worst case, pretty big number. And his category league ranking variance was about 65 spots. Just from the year-to-year variance of the individual stats. Now again, we're talking best and worst. That would mean every one of his numbers would regress to the rate that on average these things have variance. Unlikely. right? But possible. Outside possible. The best case is every one of those stats improves with that level of variance. Unlikely again. But given where he gets drafted, given what his production is, his upside level is not that high. Like there is some reward in him. He's not projecting as a top 20 player or anything along those lines, because that would give you that tremendous risk reward if you're projecting as a top 20 guy. But he doesn't for me. Like he projects best cases like top 30 and worst case like barely top 100. So he's that risky guy. So if you want to get one thing out of this show, is that A, there's the injury risk associated with Murray and the form risk, and now there's the way that the variance hits his numbers. All those things are not looking particularly awesome for me. They are some of the worrying factors. That is not what is going to determine all of my fantasy drafting strategy. That is not a good way to go. But when you get multiple factors sort of all pointing towards a similar thing, all coming in and saying, we're going to worry a little bit on a subjective side for injuries, then some data stuff comes in and go, there's a fair range of outcomes here for Murray. That's where we start to get worried. Now, his ADP is actually fine. It's at 49. On ESPN, it's at 46. That's actually sort of bang on. I think that's about the right area. And look, he could beat that. That's why there is risk versus reward. But there is some downside with Jamal that maybe we aren't addressing all that much. That's possible as well. But I actually do think it's been covered probably enough. The last part that I want to get into here, and again, and whenever I do these team preview shows, this is the first one of 30. We'll try and work out exactly the flow of the show and how well it is, how good it goes. What language am I talking here? how everything looks and feels, and I think it's gone so far pretty good. But we haven't actually spoken about the big man, the man in the middle, Big Chungus. Now, that headline you saw flash up on that transition says over the hill. Is that inflammatory? A little bit, yeah. But this is where we start talking Jokic. Because the thing that I have noticed, objectively, the thing that I have noticed and been able to track is that players' production, when you hit the age of 29, your production goes down. There are very few players who are able to buck that trend. Very few. Now, when we say that a player's production goes down, that doesn't all go down the same rate. You might lose 0.02% production. You might lose 3% between 29 and 30. But aging curves and production hit to age 29, let's say 28 to 30 is a range, and then you start to fall. Now, whether you fall like this or you fall like that, that's dependent. So let's talk about Nikola Jokic, because he is now in that decline phase. I'm not expecting him to be bad. In fact, as you would know, I've been doing a lot of work over the last 2 years trying to figure out fantasy rankings for category leagues and how to make them make more sense. And I introduced Durant last season, which was a way to address the fact that we use standard scores, Z-scores, on fantasy stats that aren't normally distributed, even though Z-scores required normal distribution to be impactful and to work, right? So I hated that idea. So I tried to work on something and I got something out and we put it out. We talked about it and the impact of Durant. And then a little thing came up that I didn't like how it worked, and it really sort of set me back. I couldn't figure it out. It was to do with how we addressed the percentages. I think I fixed it. That's going to come out on Basketball Monster soon, but I think I've fixed the issue that I had with Durant and the percentages. All this is to say that I ran all the numbers again, and this season, like say Jokic, maybe there's a decline coming here. This is just a good excuse to talk Jokic. I need to slot him in somewhere. He averaged 26, 12, and 9, 58 and 82. Like he's rock solid and all these things. There is going to be decline at some point. He's not invincible. And yes, he doesn't jump and all that. There will be decline. The rate is what we just need to watch. And I think there is a risk that he played 35 minutes a night. Like, could he play 32 this season? 33? I think it's 100% possible. 100% possible doesn't mean 100% happening. It means it's 100% possible. So all those things could change. But back to the Durant discussion is I ran all the numbers, and I've had Victor Wembanyama sitting clearly number one for fantasy, even though when I've said it, like I said, look, my projections have Victor 1, but if I had 5 number 1 picks, I'd take Victor 3 and I'd take Jokic 2. I ran the Durant numbers. I might switch it to Jokic 3 times, Wemby 2 now. It's a small change, but the numbers actually put Wemby off number 1 and Jokic back to number 1. It's not true. It actually put Embiid to number 1, but I'm not touching Embiid at number 1. So that was interesting to me. Just the way that I think that I've been able to sort out the problem with the rankings. And I've tried to approximate the way I had Durant going last season with a lot of weighting stuff on regular Z-scores. And those numbers came out pretty similar. But I think that I might have fixed it. I just don't know yet. We're still always in the testing phase with this stuff. But anyway, with Jokic, we do just have to watch. Like, can he withstand 35 minutes a night again this season? Will we see any level of decline anywhere? We can't. We're at the stage in his career at age 30 that we cannot rule it out. Well, I'm not saying it is going to happen, but we can't rule it out. And I will reiterate this again. I will take Jokic number 1 now. Before I was doing a 60-40. I might actually take Jokic 60, Wemby 40 now. Debatable. It's debatable for me at this point. There are 3 other guys on this team who are in the decline phase over the age of 29. Russell Westbrook, we've spoken about already. Dario Saric, we've spoken about already. And we've already seen Westbrook's decline. Like, remember Westbrook's triple-double season, right? That was awesome. This is what we talk about the decline. Look where he is now. Yes, that's like 6 years later, but this happens to everybody. Everyone falls. DeAndre Jordan, absolutely useless as a player. This stuff happens. So Jordan's in here as an older player as well, and hopefully with Chanchar, with Saric, we won't need to see Jordan much. Although, to be fair to DeAndre Jordan, in the games that he had to start last season, thought he was okay. I don't think he was terrible. In terms of the guys on this roster, there are a few players that we haven't touched on, and there's a reason for that. There's 3 of them. It's Jalen Pickett, who I think is bad. There's Hunter Tyson, who I also think is pretty bad. And then there is Zeke Naji, who I'm very convinced is bad. There's also Spencer Jones, who's on a 2-way. Let's just quickly, just for completeness, so we are talking about everybody, let's have a quick look at some of Zeke Naji's numbers from last season. Naji had the opportunity for multiple seasons to be the backup center. He's only 6'9", but he's 24 now. He averaged 3 points in 10 minutes. He blocked 0.7 shots in 10 minutes, which is not bad. But the shooting has never come along. He doesn't finish well. I think he's pretty much cooked as an NBA player. I don't think he's going to be a part of the rotation really at all for this season. And I had some hopes for him. It just never worked out. Jalen Pickett, first round pick last season. He looked atrocious in Summer League. I hated him as a prospect. He's already 25. He's only 6'2". He played 5 minutes a game. He averaged 1 point. He shot 43 from the field. He should have been like a guy that was allegedly a shooter with some defensive ability and passing, and they've got obviously an opening for a point guard, and they had to go and get Russell Westbrook. I think that Trey Alexander is going to take this guy's roster spot really quickly. His full-time roster spot, they'll just get rid of Pickett somehow, and Trey Alexander will step in there because I think that Pickett is just bad. The other guy that we saw people have some hope for last season was Hunter Tyson, second-round pick. Showed out in Summer League with some really strong shooting and then came to the league and did nothing. He averaged 1 point a game. He never played. Michael Malone does not like playing young players, even though he is not young. He is 24. 1 year younger than Juan Soto, by the way. He is a guy that, again, I hated the profile for him coming out of college. I was like, this guy doesn't make sense as an NBA player. What are we doing? And then he played well in the Summer League games. And then this year in Summer League, he was terrible. And he was terrible last season. And I do not see anything interesting for him at all. There you go. That is... and Spencer Jones, cool. Don't think he's lasting on that 2-way. The 2-way guys we want to watch are Trey Alexander and to a lesser extent, Paul John Hall. Don't think that's his name, but we'll go with it anyway. And that's it. That is our first team preview show. I'll just quickly throw this back up on the screen as well. Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. Link is in the description on YouTube. It is in the show notes on audio. Fill it out if you want in. 3 formats. Roto, points, head-to-head. You can be in all of them. You can only be in them once, but you can be in all of them. $50 entry. Big prizes. Fun. Good format. 85% approval on the format last season. And I reckon the 15% that disapproved just didn't like it because it was different. That's how some people are sometimes, which is cool as well. So, check it out. Sign up. and do your best to go and like and subscribe to this show. Hit the thumb up, leave your comments, tell me what you think about the Nuggets. Murray, iffy. Westbrook, maybe undervalued. Hate where Porter's going. Gordon, really format dependent, and of course Jokic, who I've just pushed slightly higher. Slightly higher. More in the mix at number 1, even though I had him in the mix, he's more in the mix at number 1 now. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.